today and a conversation about philosophies, Mace. As we look to the NFL draft, we know that Sean Payton has one philosophy, George Paton has a different philosophy. And when Zach Allen says, changes that are moving, and I said, that's an active word, like changes. Okay. Could there be a change after the draft? If these two can't work it out, what does that mean for the future of George Paton?
That's a good question. I mean, as Zach Allen said, necessary changes are being made in
Yes.
regards to what's going on in the offseason. That's kind of what the tense to which you're referring. There's a lot of examples of tension between two warring, I wouldn't say warring people here at all. I think George Paton and Sean Payton get along personally. It's the draft philosophies that are different. And, sometimes you take two extremes and you find reality and accord in the middle. But when you're talking about something as important as searching for the next quarterback, is compromise really what everyone is going to want? Sean Payton, when he was in New Orleans, often traded up last year. George Paton prefers to trade back and collect darts. He called it the more darts philosophy a few years ago, best shown by what they did in the third round of 2021. It's tough to bridge the gaps between those two because historically, George Paton and Sean Payton have been part and parcel of two fundamentally different ways in going about the NFL draft.
Right. And can they come together and searching for the quarterback, the desperation that surrounds this team right now? Honestly, I think there's a healthy amount of respect. Not only do they like each other personally, I think there's a lot of respect because when Sean talks about George, it's always about how much George is working, right? And George is a worker, man. He's a grinder. He's a scout. That's what he's going to do. So it's like, okay, there's a respect level, but at the end of the day, we know who's calling the shots, and it's not George Paton.
There's a respect level for the work ethic, and not only of George Paton, but his entire staff. And that is essential because you're counting on George Paton and his staff to kind of have their contacts around the league and get a feel for what other teams might do. Who's interested in moving up? Who's interested in moving back? What might team A be thinking at quarterback? What might team B be doing? So that intel is what can lead to what you hope can lead to better decisions and working the board better to where you say, okay, this player we want, what if we can get him 20 picks later and get an extra pick? I mean, that's basically what happened in round 3 back in 2021, where you turn one selection into two because you're able to get Baron Browning and Quinn Miners at the end of the third round. So if it's Bo Nix, that may come in handy if that's the player you want, the quarterback you want, because then you may be able to move down several slots and pick up a day 2 pick, which you desperately need. But what if Sean Payton is back in the mode that he was in New Orleans, illustrated by when the Saints went after Marcus Davenport in 2018, and says, I want to make like George and Weezy Jefferson and move on up.
That's what I think could happen.
And sacrifice potentially years of first-round draft capital in order to do it. That's, and I think George Paton, having just been through 2 drafts without a first-rounder, that is probably anathema to him at this point.
Yes.
So, how do you get these opposite philosophies to mesh? And that's why, the compromise cease maybe stay right there at 12 and pick Bo Nix, which in our piece at denversports.com over the weekend, asking the Denver Sports and 104.3 the fan staff what they thought the Broncos would do. That's what I suggested. I thought it was going to be ultimately stay at 12 and pick Bo Nix.
Yeah, because Sean Payton wants a quarterback. George Paton's already said, I believe it was at the combine, correct me if I'm wrong, where he's like, there's a lot of misses in the first round of quarterback. Okay, there's a lot of misses everywhere. And there's more after the first round, by the way, in terms of misses on quarterback. So that combination, or that compromise, I should say, could just be stay put. Even though George may move back, and you potentially could move back and still get Nix at 20 or whatever. I don't like that because you could miss out on him. But if you stay put and get a quarterback that will work with Sean and that Sean likes, it seems evident that they like Bo Nix. Maybe that's where George is somewhat satisfied and Sean is somewhat satisfied. It just depends on if Sean wants to compromise, because that's the thing about compromise. Both parties have to be willing. Mm-hmm. One party's probably willing, and that's George Paton's side. I don't know what Sean Payton's thinking.
And as we talked about, is the difference between the hypothetical difference between JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix, is that worth potentially 3 first-round picks? I think that's a real valid question in terms of overall team building. And I would argue, the funny thing is, Cease, I would argue that in working with Sean Payton, maybe the difference isn't worth 3 first-rounders, because I don't think Bo Nix would be a washout working with Sean Payton. I just think that the absolute ceiling would not be as high because there aren't as many clubs in his bag as JJ McCarthy possesses. I mean, look, the other thing also, I mean, I know you have JJ with a 2nd-round grade.
Yes.
You have Bo Nix with a round 1 grade.
Mm-hmm.
A year from now, I'd suggest, I don't want to put thoughts in your head, words in your mouth. I would suggest that a year from now, if JJ had gone back to Michigan, JJ would have a 1st-round grade.
Yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And potentially higher than the round 1 grade that you have on Bo Nix at that point. So the question then becomes, okay, if that's where that quarterback was going anyway with 1 more year, whereas Bo Nix has, he's been starting for 5 years at the college level rather than 2 like JJ McCarthy, what's the ceiling? Is that ceiling worth the loss of draft capital in future years? I'd say George Paton probably believes it's not, and I'd suggest that maybe Sean Payton thinks that it could be worth that much. Right. So, man, I mean, you ever wonder if George Paton sits back and thinks to himself, this job did not go the way I planned it in any way, shape, or form?
Well, here's what you have to think if you're George Paton, Mace. And what's odd about this, and this is a great conversation for us to have, you are making moves for players who might hit their peak when you're not there. Like, think about that. If you're George, right? Sean's fine. Sean can coach as long as he wants, provided that there's a certain amount of success. But if you're George Paton, you are maneuvering in this draft for players, and you might lose your job in May. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. But or let's say in 2 years when McCarthy's now finally reaching his potential, then you're replaced, right? So you have to have a steady mind of like, I'm going to stick with what I know and what I believe. And that's why George Paton is kind of stuck with his principles and not just like, hey, Sean, we'll do what you want, Sean. Like, no, I don't think he's like that at all.
Yeah. And of course, George Paton, looks around that staff and there are people that he's been responsible for bringing in, and, you don't want something to happen to them. Right. But if George Paton at some point is nice to the door, I mean, it's a question of, okay, is Sean Payton going to bring in people that he's connected with? Because we already have Cody Rager in the building, right? Mm-hmm. Who came from New Orleans. We've, actually one thing that we have learned this off season is that, are there more players from the Saints that you can, or more people, I should say, because beyond players, when you see someone like Cody, are there more people from the Saints that you can go get? Yes, there are more people, and I look, you get that, right? There's a comfort level with with who you know, and that's the palace intrigue. It's I think the thing is, I think George Paton can kind of go along to get along with this. But at some point, you can't help but be frustrated when the vision is evolving into something that maybe you didn't see. I mean, shoot. Not that I think this is going to be the case, and let me make this clear. The Broncos do not want to trade Pat Surtain. Period. They do
Bold
not.
letters.
Yes, bold, all caps, underlined, whatever you can do. 120-point type. But I mean, that's an interesting thing to think about. If maybe that I say compromise is stay at 12 and pick Bo Nix. Maybe if they decide that JJ McCarthy or Drake May are the ones they gotta have, that is it okay? We'll do this, but but let's not sacrifice as much draft capital. Let's only go into next year's first round pick and hold on to 2026. But that means trading Pat Surtain as part of the deal. That would hurt. That again, also either way, it's gonna hurt. You either trade first rounders through 2026, or you have a deal where the draft capital kind of shuts off at 2025, probably. But you end up including Surtain. Because, by the way, there's no one else who can really move the needle on a deal on the roster to appreciably alter what you'd have to give up. There's just nobody on the roster is strong enough in terms of value at this point. Just even, maybe Quinn Miners might enter that conversation, but that also would hurt Sean Payton, because Sean loves to build his offensive lines from the inside out.
Yes.
No, historically, in the last 20 years or so, nobody has invested more in the guard position than Sean Payton with the New Orleans Saints. And of course, last year, his first big strike was Ben Powers, the guard coming over from Baltimore. And we have every indication that Quinn Miners is in line for a huge deal. And that, even though, Miners is a player that he inherited, that very much fits in with Sean Payton's philosophy of team building, especially on the offensive side.
Yeah, inside out on the O-line, and then let's go Broncos. Now, as I was thinking about you last night, Mace, as I often do, I was like,
that's a little interesting. You think about thinking about me last night. Wow. Sometimes I think about you at night too.
Okay, there we go. It's only weird if you make it weird. I'll say this. I wanted to chop it up with you.
I'll be weird with you. I'll be weird with you. How about that?
Okay, that sounds good. I wanted to chop it up with you about how much influence Pat Mahomes has on this move, because you mentioned frustration. Imagine Sean getting Bo Nix and then watching JJ McCarthy become a superstar with Minnesota, or Drake May. And then getting frustrated, and I'm working with this guy, he's limited, because I think Bo Nix is kind of what he is. It's never really going to go up, but not going to drop real low. I don't think you're going to bust on Bo Nix. Could be wrong. But then I think of his thoughts, Sean Payton's thoughts on Pat Mahomes. And it's that one that got away thing, man. It's that, I knew it. If there is a guy, whether it's McCarthy, May, whoever, but if there's a guy that Sean feels like that, we know who's going to win. So the Pat Mahomes thing, it's kind of a double entendre, because it's you have to deal with him for 10 more years, and you also loved him. And if you fall in love like that again, and if he knew about Mahomes, we know who's going to win out. We know the Broncos will move up.
Yeah. This, by the way, was Sean Payton's quote on Patrick Mahomes after watching his workout. Quote, "I felt like it was the best quarterback I had ever seen on tape in a workout. I'd done a lot of them to that point. You name it. I just thought he had that rare ability, and there was going to be a ton of upside. Man, he was real good in the meeting room. He processed the information extremely well. All those things you can't see on video. That was just my instincts. I didn't know for sure," unquote.
Wow.
What if he came out of Ann Arbor thinking that about JJ McCarthy or something similar like that?
Yep.
That answer that he gave in Orlando.
The look on his face when he said he made him throw again, he was like, there's a little joyous. It was like that. I've watched it multiple times. He was so happy. We made him throw again.
He was riffing, and he was in a happy place, like in Happy Gilmore. It's instead of Chubbs Peterson playing the piano with both of his hands intact, or Julie Bowen with a couple of pictures of beer.
Yes.
watching JJ McCarthy work out and meeting with him and that's the thing. Like if he met with JJ and saw everything that he wanted to see in terms of processor, and that is so important, processing and ingesting information, and he saw that, and that's where the argument may be, yes, that is worth 3 first-round picks of difference, even though it makes team building difficult beyond that. Difficult, but not impossible, especially as and this is another thing, you take that $53 million hit this year, and then it's $32 million next year. At that point, you've actually got a fairly average dead cap figure in 2025. Maybe even it ends up settling as a below average dead cap figure, and you can do some things. I mean, yeah, the Broncos could have plenty of money to spend. Yes, a lot of it could go to Pat Surtain and Quinn Miners, but you could be talking about, depending on how you structure the contracts, you could be talking about another $75, $80 million that you could spend in the 2025 offseason to build up the supporting cast and then be ready to roll it with JJ, even if you don't have that first round pick. So
yeah, and you can draft well. Again, your first round pick can be in the 7th round. Your first round pick can be an undrafted guy. Like if you draft well, if you hit, and that's where George comes back into the conversation, because George can hit on day 3.
Yeah.
If he gets a little more bold. He's hit on day 3 before. I know teams that made fun of the Broncos for drafting Quinn Miners. Who's laughing now, right? George can hit on mid-round. He needs to hit some more late round. The Cooper thing notwithstanding, that was a health thing. But like, I know George can do it. He just needs to stop looking at like, we need special teams guys. You got special teams guys, George. Go get those freaks. I know he sees them.
Take chances on talent that may fall for whatever reason. The school they went to, a health concern like Jonathan Cooper. Even though it hasn't come to fruition yet, I liked the gamble on JL Skinner last year in round 6 rather than, this was a guy who some were talking about as a 2nd round pick for a while and had an injury concern and, had a rough time before he got hurt in the pre-draft run-up. So take those chances. You mentioned a player that they had in for a visit, David White, the wide receiver out of Western Carolina, who we saw down at the Shrine.
We loved him.
Boy, oh boy, yeah, we loved him. Inconsistent, oh my goodness, yes. But had some of the best catches of that week as we were watching him. And you see those flashes. And we were saying off mic before we did this show, bring in a David White and say Tim Patrick, this is your protege. And tell David White, this is the person whose work ethic and diligence you need to emulate, because there's a reason why Tim Patrick is now on his 1, 2, 3, 4th full-time head coach, right? Tim Patrick has been here since Vance Joseph, and every coach has loved Tim Patrick because he works his tail off. That's something that's universal to what coaches want, right?
Yeah. That's what they want. You go find him. You go get him. George, I know you can do it. Yeah. Just go do it now, man. Go do it.
Take chances on talent that falls for, and usually they fall like reasons of bias. I mean, how could a guy from Wisconsin Whitewater be anything? Oh, he didn't play last year because of COVID. Oh, his workout regimen is him going up to Manitoba
snap into a trash can.
Yes, I mean, screw that.
Yeah.
But if you can play, you can play, right? And I think George is very good at that, at cutting past the biases.
Yes.
And focusing on the talent. This is not a popular thing to say among many in Broncos country, but George Paton, there are some things that he does really well that can make him a very good general manager. I think more highly of him than most, honestly, because he took a gamble with Russell Wilson and it didn't work. I don't necessarily think it's wise to say, okay, because that didn't work, he has to pay for it with his job. It's what it would be the simple thing to do, but it may not be the wise thing to do in terms of what he does bring, in terms of his connections, the intel, and again, kind of cutting through the bull and being able to identify a prospect. But he will take dice rolls. I mean, you could argue Greg Dulcich was a bit of a dice roll, right? I mean, he comes in like he's a good pass catching tight end, but if you're going to make him into an every down tight end in line, you're going to have to add some weight. Now that gamble hasn't paid off. We've seen flashes, right? I mean, that is one thing. I mean, I do want him to keep taking some swings here. I do.
Yeah. And maybe that's where the compromise comes in, because we know George is going to work. We know George has an eye for talent. Let's get a little bit more bold and stop worrying about guys that play special teams. That's a recipe.
You've got enough special teamers. You've got a good special teams unit right now. Focus on high level talent. Now, Jonathan Cooper was one of those rare players who had a much higher ceiling than round 7 would indicate, but could be a good special teamer. So maybe that's, maybe the players like him are the needle you're trying to thread a little bit, right?
Right.
I mean, take a look at those guys. And oh, by the way, remember, Jonathan Cooper was in the mix in a year where it was 2021. A lot of players did not come out that people thought would because of COVID. And we're still working our way out of that. The back end of the draft is not great. So this is another reason to take chances on high upside guys who have a but on their legend. Take those risks.
Take those risks. See if they pay off. It's not a risk if at 12.
Roll the dice. Spin that wheel. Double down on a lucky deal.
At 12, a good deal would be UCLA pass rusher Latu. I think I got that right. Who the Broncos have interest in, including a top 30 visit. Yes, the top 30 visits abound. That seems like a George Paton. I tweeted about it. If George could just stay at 12 and get Latu, I bet he'd love to do that. I don't think Sean wants to do that, but that's the type of player. And again, fine edge rusher, maybe the best edge rusher in this class. But that seems more like a George Paton type of pick.
Yeah, I think this is a bold comparison, but Lance Zierlein makes the comparison of Latu to TJ Watt.
Pretty good comparison.
That is like, you see that, you're like, whoa.
And Lance is not one for a hyperbole. Lance is one of the brightest minds in the draft game.
Yes, this is a high proficiency, high character player as well. Now, you go back, when you talk to him, you want to also go through the medicals. He had a neck issue that kept him out for 2 years when he was at the University of Washington before he transferred to UCLA. So you want to make sure that is cleared up. He's been healthy the last 2 years, which has helped. He's had double-digit sacks the last 2 years. He had 21.5 TFLs as well. This is a guy. The thing about Latu that you like is that he's a plus player against the run as well as he is in the pass rush. Right. And you kind of look at the Broncos edge rushers, and they've got some good players, but they've got they've got 2s and 3s in the rotation. Like I've made the baseball pitching rotation comparison. It's like a rotation that doesn't have an ace. They have a number 2 as their number 1, a 3 as their 2. But then they've got like a 3 as their 3, a 3 as their 4, and a 3 as their 5, kind of, right? It's deep, but it lacks the alpha, the ace at the top, and Latu has that sort of potential. Boy, I wish the Broncos were in a better place at quarterback, because then you could sit there. Like, if you had quarterback set, if Russell Wilson had worked out, Latu would be a guy that you'd
you're dialed in on that
with the name on that card.
I'll give you a different name, and because you bring up Wilson with your Let's Ride towel behind you, I see it, Mace.
Yeah, okay.
Did you hear the?
Should I take it down or should I leave it? I ask you, the viewers.
Okay.
Please chime in. I'll actually be away from this vantage for a couple weeks, so you won't see it for a little bit. But yeah, should I take that down or keep it? Let us know in the comments.
People may not want to see it again, but anyway, let us know in the comments below, and like and comment and all that kind of stuff.
It is a part of Broncos history.
It is.
Like it or not.
Did you see the Sam Howell stuff about like how, okay, it was Seattle, Denver, what's it, the Rams, but like he's such an alpha Like he wanted to go somewhere he could be like promised of being the man or be in line to be the man. And that's why the Commanders knew they couldn't keep him and then draft Jaden Daniels or whatever. But it's like, I'll give you Sam Howell. If the Broncos had been able to pull off that deal for Sam Howell, now you're talking about Latu at 12. That's the type of deal you could have made. Still get your young guy, Pratt, in the 3rd round or whatever. It could have been different if you got Howell.
Okay, now let me ask you this then. Okay. In the end, as was reported by NFL Network, it did kind of come down to the Rams and the Seahawks, and the Seahawks outbid. The Broncos, they were in a position where they didn't want to sacrifice draft capital. But here's the thing, Cease. You'd be sacrificing a lot less draft capital at that point than you would to move up from 12 if you want to go get J.J. McCarthy potentially, right?
Right.
So what do you really want? Now, that being said, I'd say if there may be more to J.J. McCarthy than Sam Howell, but also to take this in, the fact that Sean McVay and Sean Payton were both intrigued by Sam Howell to pick up the phone, okay, to be interested. That says a lot about Sam Howell. I don't feel so crazy now, and you shouldn't either, Cease, for maybe seeing something in Sam Howell that a lot of people don't.
Yes,
right.
There's more there.
If I've got the Sean seeing some potential in Sam Howell, I feel pretty good about that for the Seans. I feel pretty good about that assessment. If I've got them saying, "Hey, I want to take a look at Sam Howell here." I mean, with the Rams, certainly the fact that they were in on the Sam Howell discussion shows they are looking for a baton passing, a graceful passing of the baton, but nonetheless moving forward from Matthew Stafford. That they're looking at to the future right now.
Right. What might have been? That might be a what if for us during the summer. What if you got Sam Howell? How would that have changed your draft?
I'm actually starting to make a list of what ifs. And that's a good one. Some recent what ifs are kind of interesting as well, because then we're kind of projecting out to the future. Although I admit with Sam Howell, I might kind of project a little best case thing because, I always liked his moxie, man. That dude.
Yep.
Yeah, I think he'll go to Seattle, and I think he'll take that job eventually from Geno Smith.
Oh yeah, for sure. He might win it in training camp. So if he was here, he'd be the clear-cut starter.
And of course, that would imagine if he goes to Seattle, wins the job, and does well, and you were interested in Sam Howell, but you didn't quite want to make that deal because of the draft capital that you're still.
Seattle screwing you again.
Those dastardly Seahawks. Ugh.
We would have got away with it. It would have been for your 12th man.
Yes, you meddling Seahawks. Oh, gosh.
Oh, boy.
So that's our Scooby-Doo ending, huh?
That is. All right. That's it. That's a wrap for today's program. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammey. But before we're out of here, you got to help us out on YouTube, Mace. How do you do that?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell
so that you never miss a vid. That's correct. It'll time up. It'll time up. It's good. It's orange and blue today.
I like your faith. I like that.
It's OBT. It is a BFD. He's Mace. I'm Cease. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned, and would you please stay frosty.